I'm Kirti Rajagopalan. I'm a PhD candidate at Washington State University in the Civil Engineering Department, and I'm also affiliated with the Center for Sustaining Ag and Natural Resources, CSANR, at Washington State University too. So this talk is about impacts of climate change on agriculture in the Columbia River Basin, and this is the team of collaborators that have helped with the work that is presented here. The part of the work that's presented here today, there's two objectives that we are trying to address there. The first is to characterize the direct impacts of climate change and increasing carbon dioxide levels on both irrigation demands and crop yields in the Columbia River Basin for the 2030s. And secondly, we are also trying to characterize the indirect impacts of climate change and carbon dioxide levels through water right curtailments. And this is for the Washington part of the Columbia River Basin. So as I mentioned, this is the study. This is the study area, the Columbia River Basin, and agriculture is a vital part of the economy here. And it's also a heavily managed watershed, so it's a good test bed for agriculture and water-related questions. And we look at the water rights curtailment that happens in the Washington state part. So this map here, it shows the locations that have curtailable or interruptible grid cells in the state. And in Washington, this interruption happens in really three different ways. There is the Yakima region, where it's through a system of proration, where every year at different points of the year you look at the total water availability and inform producers on how much of their water right, what percentage of their water right they will be able to use for the rest of the season. There are other locations where the water rights are subject to in-stream flow rules at different locations, and so the water rights are curtailable if flows in those locations fall below a certain range. These are the two things that we have accounted for in this study. In addition, there's also the issue of senior water right holders being able to call upon junior right holders in times of shortages, and that's something that's not included here right now. So what are the direct and indirect effects of climate change? So one of the factors that affects the potential yield or the maximum yield that is available, that is possible in a region, is the climate. So therefore, any changes in climate affect the potential yields in the region. The increased carbon dioxide levels can also increase potential yields through carbon dioxide fertilization effects. In addition, they can also affect water availability through changes in water supply as well as irrigation demand. So climate change, for example, affects this, which can indirectly affect yields under water limitations. Similarly, carbon dioxide levels, under increased carbon dioxide levels, there are higher water use efficiencies, which can impact the irrigation demand, which would also impact the water availability. So those are the indirect effects. In addition to these effects that we consider here, which are the potential yields and the water limitation, there are also nutrient limitations, pests, weeds, and diseases, and other management factors that could affect these yields. And we have heard this quite a bit today, but the expected changes to climate in the Columbia River Basin, the increases in temperature are a robust signal. The precipitation changes are a little less certain, but in terms of agriculture, we know that the precipitation is expected to increase in the early growth season and the late growth season, with some decreases in the peak summer demands. So together, we expect to see more precipitation as rain instead of snow, reduced snowpack, and earlier snow melt, and these affect the stream flow seasonality with more cold season flows and less warm season flows, which is important for agriculture. And so there are implications for water availability as well as irrigation demands. So just some background here, and some of this Tina touched upon too. But what are the effects of increasing temperatures on crop yields? Typically, we expect to see a negative effect on crop production, and this can be due to accelerated growing degree day accumulation. So with increased temperatures, although there is a longer available growing season, the crops grow faster and mature early and are not able to make use of that longer season. In addition, there's heat stress, and there's also a potential increase in the variability of yields. However, positive effects are also possible because there are optimal temperature ranges for different crop growth stages, and by shifting growth stages to optimal ranges or being in the same optimal range could have positive effects. In addition, certain crop categories that are harvested as multiple cuttings can make use of the entire longer available growing season and maybe get an extra cutting, and therefore increases in yields. The effect of increasing carbon dioxide levels is typically expected to be positive, and mostly for this class of crops called the C3 crops, which is different from C4 crops, an example for which is corn. So the C4 class of crops already have very efficient carbon dioxide pathways, and therefore any increases in carbon dioxide levels don't help them as much as most of the other crops, which are C3 crops. On the flip side though, there is a positive effect on weeds too, and also the increases in yields due to carbon dioxide level increases can potentially be moderated by nutrient limitations as well as interactions with temperature effects and other factors. So what's described here is the biophysical modeling framework that we use to address these questions. There are a few different components to this. The first part here is a coupled crop hydrology model. The hydrology model we use is a large-scale model, WIC, which is coupled with CropSyst, which is a point or field scale cropping systems model. And together, this component here gives us information on runoff and base flow, irrigation demands, as well as crop yields. And the output from this is then routed to get stream flows and bias corrected, and then it passes through a reservoir simulation because the Columbia River Basin is heavily regulated with multiple dams. It passes through reservoir simulations to get water availability information. And once we have that can be compared with in-stream flow demands as well as the irrigation demands and the irrigation demands from the interruptible grid cells, because the non-interruptible grid cells are not subject to curtailment, and make and get information on potential shortages. And once we have that information, this framework can be run again, but instead of providing the full crop water needs, we apply just the water that's available and can see what kind of effect that can have on yields. So once we have estimates of shortages, how do we distribute it among the multiple crops that are there in a grid cell? So we assume that what producers follow is selective deficit irrigation. That is, they choose to send water to the high value crops, which would be tree fruit, vegetables, and etc., as compared to allocating the water to lower value crops in the grid cell. So these are some of the results. So overall for the Columbia River Basin, we see a small increase in supply, about 5%, and a small increase in irrigation demand, about 5% for the 2030s. But there are a lot of regional differences, and for example, in a place like Yakima that is already under water stress, we see more stress in the future. But other than the regional differences, there are differences by crops too. So what's shown here, the columns are the different crops that are grown in the Columbia Basin region, and for each of those crops, we isolate three different effects. So we look at the carbon dioxide effect on irrigation demands, the precipitation effect on irrigation demands, the temperature effect, and the overall effect for multiple climate scenarios. And so we can view these results as three different classes of crops. So you see a class of crops here, pasture, timothy, hay varieties, which can make use of the longer available growing season, and therefore you see increases in irrigation demands for them. Other than that, we can see perennial crops here, which even if they mature earlier in the growing season, there is still irrigation that's applied to keep the crop alive for the rest of the growing season, and we see increases in irrigation demands for those too. And then for the annual crops, the overall effect is generally negative. And here, the main, with respect to irrigation demand, really the predominant effect is the temperature effect. There are some water use efficiencies by the carbon dioxide effect, but it's very small in comparison with the temperature effect. So the temperature is the most dominant effect here. Here, it's a similar figure in terms of crops, but what's shown here are the changes in the yields of irrigated crops, and again the different effects are separated out. But there's something similar here where we see increases in yields where for crops that are harvested as multiple cuttings and are able to get extra yield through an extra harvest, an extra cutting. And then there are tree fruits like apples and pear where we don't see much of a difference, and that's because they are managed through load balancing or thinning of fruit, and so that management practice doesn't allow for large differences to be seen here. And then with the annual crops, the effect is generally negative here, and it could be positive for certain crops too, and it depends on the balance between the positive carbon dioxide effect and the negative temperature effect for that crop. So in general, as compared to the previous slide where the carbon dioxide effect was negligible in terms of irrigation demand, we see that both the carbon dioxide effect and the temperature effect play an important role in determining the overall effect on irrigated yields. In terms of dryland crop yields, now precipitation becomes the most dominant factor in determining the overall effects, and we see in general increases in yields for dryland crops in this region. There are spatial variations. So for example, this is changes in irrigated yields for two crops given here, potatoes and alfalfa, and we can see that in both cases, so in the case of potatoes, which has a decrease in yields, there are larger decreases in the snake plain as compared to the rest of the basin, and for alfalfa, which has multiple cuttings and we see increases in yields, we see a slightly larger increases in that same area as compared to the other regions. In terms of dryland yields, we see the same thing, and this is winter wheat as an example. There are larger increases seen in the snake plain area, and similarly for changes in irrigation demands too. With respect to yield reductions due to water rights curtailment, what's shown here, the green bar, and this is just for one climate scenario, the green bar here corresponds to the changes in yield just due to climate, just to give an idea of the relative magnitude of the curtailment effect as compared to the climate effect. And the yellow bars here correspond to the historical impacts on yields due to curtailment, and the red bars correspond to the future impact due to curtailment on yields. So what we see is that although the frequency of curtailments and the amount of curtailment are higher in the future, they don't translate to larger impacts on yields. And there are multiple explanations for this. First is higher water use efficiencies under elevated carbon dioxide levels. But other than that, there's also the fact that the crop growth season has shifted. And so the growth starts earlier in the season, where irrigation demand is a smaller component of the total crop water needs. So precipitation accounts for a larger fraction as compared to irrigation. And also with faster growing degree day accumulation, biomass is accumulated much faster, and by the time there's curtailment at the later part of the season, a certain amount of biomass has already been accumulated. So overall, although we see a negative impact, it's less. And relative to the climate signal, the curtailment effect is at least as much in magnitude, or the same order of magnitude, or more. So just to conclude, the yield response to various factors are crop specific and with regional differences. So in doing simulations of regional impacts, it will be useful to consider the full range of crops rather than simplifying it to one or two particular crop groups. And it's all the more important because the different factors that affect yields are non-linear, they are competing, and so over time the net effect can change, and what's a positive signal today can be a negative signal later into the future, or vice versa. So it's important to have these considerations. And in terms of impacts of climate change in the near future for our region, we see both positive and negative effects in the near future, depending on the crop and location. And there are regions of water stress which has implications for water managers. And this is essentially a foundation that can be extended to include other aspects that are relevant, such as management factors as well as socioeconomic factors, which play an equally important role as compared to climate in determining agricultural production. Thank you.
Questions for here? How is the irrigation water demand calculated?
How it's calculated?
How is it
Based on the soil water deficit?
Those figures of Idaho, the whole state with the Snake River, yeah, those with the potatoes and everything. Did you model all of those areas with CropSys?
Yes. So this is WIC CropSys, not CropSys. So WIC is a large-scale hydrology model that is set to run on grids, and so by coupling CropSys, you can run the combined model.
What's the resolution of that?
It's about 6 kilometers by 6 kilometers. Yes.
You said that VIC models reservoir dynamics.
No, it's a separate component. So WIC CropSys is a coupled crop and hydrology model, and the reservoir component is different. We use ColSim, which is a reservoir simulation model for the Columbia River Basin, and then we also use an additional simplified reservoir modeling for Yakima. Yes.
You said that under drought conditions you allocate water to high value crops. Is
Yes.
that just to crops that are highest value per acre, or is that crops that are highest value per water use?
It's a question for the economist in our group, but I believe it is not related to water use. It's just highest value per acre.
Okay, so that's deliberately watering crops that people know are inefficient.
Yeah, it could, yes. But then there are crops like grapes that are high value and very water efficient too. Yes.
With that selective irrigation, did you look at multiple scenarios, or did you always assume that the farmer was going to send 100% of his water to the highest value crops?
So the way this is done is this whole modeling framework runs on a grid cell level. So in every grid cell, there is a certain amount of irrigation demand that is associated with every crop that's in that grid cell. So we combine them as demands associated with the lower value crops, the medium value crops, and the higher value crops. And if there is a shortage, then we meet the crop water needs of the high value crops completely, and then only give the leftover water to the rest of the crops.
Okay, thank you, Kirti. Just another comment to that set of questions on how decisions are made around irrigation, deficit irrigation, or curtailment is you have to make some assumptions about how you're going to do it to simplify what you're doing in a modeling framework. It's much more complicated in the real world. So in the case of, say, the Rosa this year and the Yakima, there were a lot of high-value crops that didn't get water just because of the way things work out. But it's just much more complicated to do. Okay, our